This is When Real Estate Gets Real, hosted by Stephen Lee Thomas, a behind the scenes podcast for real estate operators navigating what actually happens after the first deal. When real investors, real pressure, and real leadership begin to shape the business. Let's get into it.
All right, welcome back to When Real Estate Gets Real. Today, my guest is Will Curtis out of San Antonio, a commercial real estate broker who's done over $1 billion in transactions and is also affectionately known as the property operations whisperer. So I'd love to hear more about that. Hey, Will, thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Super excited to take part of it and have the conversation.
Will, can you give us a little bit of background about yourself and what you're actively working on today?
Yeah, so I didn't start off in real estate or thought I'd be going into real estate really whatsoever. I joined the military shortly after graduating high school, spent my time in service. And at that point, we had the guy who was called our command financial specialist. Effectively, he was the one that coached not to go buy the Camaro for 36% interest rate and not to bounce checks. So, that guy that was kind of teaching those classes did a very rich dad, poor dad esque retirement pitch and got talking about how he, with 20 plus years of experience, was making more in his real estate investments than he was in his time in the Army. And here I am, a young, PFC specialist making all of like $1,300 a month. And that sounded great. He seemed like a normal guy and kind of got me on fire to do real estate. So after my term ended, I decided I was going to get a degree in real estate, be the smartest house flipper there ever was. And you could argue I never flipped a house, so maybe I still am. But we got through that process and kind of open up doors to commercial real estate and understanding that side of the world. And that's kind of where we are now. Today, the things we're working on, honestly, building the brokerage, the property management side of things, and with the ultimate goal of having a fund of ourself and being a veteran, kind of given that opportunity to hand back to where it's a fund that is not only veterans, but maybe with a lower buy-in for veterans so they can start getting into what investing looks like and really start to see how good financial health can look. And that way they don't struggle the same way many of us as we got out of the service did as we where we are now.
I think that is a fantastic idea. I get to speak with a number of people, and I am surprised at the number of people who are in the military or getting out of the military who are seeking real estate. But to find someone who's like gone down that path and crack the code and then make a fund available, I think that's a fantastic idea. How far along are you in getting that established and then making that available to the veterans?
I think we're still probably a couple of years off. Right
Okay.
now, the goal is to have everything contained so we can run everything. So the brokerage side is kind of up and where it needs to be. The property management side is what we're kind of building and growing and building that ability to kind of manage everything. And then from there, the following year or so is where we're hoping to have the fund kind of put together and available and start looking to attract capital. So in the end, that's where we want to be. That's what we want to do. But we know to be able to do it right and be able to handle those things in house, we've got to get all the other eggs in the basket first and really make sure that it's operating at peak performance. These are going to be fellow service members who are going to trust us with their money. I want to make sure that all the wheels are spinning the way they're supposed to before we jump in there and start risking their money on something that could be detrimental to them.
Okay, so we will keep it on the radar. And we can check back in a year. We can check back in a couple of years,
Yeah.
bring you back on. I'd love to have you back on, and spread the word because I do think that that's something very noble to be doing. I want to spend a few moments, excuse me. I want to spend a few moments talking about the operational side of things. Um, you've been in the game for a long time, and I've been around through this market cycle, which it had its ups and downs, and right now we're very down. Um, let's talk operations and how have you had to shift your approach and shift your thinking over the last few years to really, keep properties in a position where they're not upside down?
And truthfully, to do it for every property is impossible. And I'm an office broker primarily, most of our business in the office market. So for the last, I don't know, 5, 6 years now, we've been getting spanked, right? The office market is not the most attractive market to be in. In fact, we were putting a development up that literally went vertical the day after or the week after COVID shut everything down. So we were going vertical with a 180,000 square foot office building in the middle of a complete collapse of the office market, which is not a fun place to be in. There's a reason why there's a few gray hairs, as we're trying to get that put together. So I think operations. There's a lot of things you can do in operations to make things work, but I think it really comes down to, even at the very beginning, is doing the right underwriting, making sure that when you're coming in, you're buying it right, you're doing the things that you need to do. And I was blessed when I came into the industry. I came into the industry in about 2010. So the people that I was dealing with were the investors who made it through the great financial recession or the great financial crash.
Mm-hmm.
They were the ones that made it through, and I don't know, maybe just dumb luck or being smart enough to ask the question. I asked every investor we were working with, how did you make it through? What did you do differently? Why are you here, but the other 15 are not? And every single one of them said, we managed our debt. We managed the leverage we put on our property. Every guru out there prior to, the crash was talking about, go out there. They're going to pay you money to go buy stuff. You can do everything you want. It's easy money. You're an idiot for not doing this. And they over leveraged themselves and found themselves a few years later no longer the guru, no longer the sell in the class at the Holiday Inn Express, no longer doing all that stuff because they were completely out of the game. And so the folks that we've talked to that have been through cycle after cycle after cycle, when they bought, they managed the leverage where, the main investors we worked at through there, they walked in 50% LTV, put half down, dropped another, million and a half into the property to fix it up. And then when the market completely collapsed, they could go $8 more a square foot below than what anybody else could. And they had a 90% occupied space when the rest of the market was at 70. So no matter what you can do in operations, buying it right is absolutely going to be it. But even from the operations side, they went in there, they competitively bid everything. They looked over every bit of it, having, property management folks that understood the trades and understood the deals that were going on behind the scenes and what was happening in the market, and being smart to, start changing HVAC units before the Freon change. I mean, all these little things that just knowing what's happening in the industry are the things that position that property long-term for success. And it takes somebody who lives and dies in that space to really see that coming up.
Somebody who's probably got a few battle scars, made a few mistakes and learned some things along the way. You said you're primarily focused on the retail side of commercial. Is that correct?
Mostly office.
Mostly office. Okay.
Yeah.
Mostly office. How has you mentioned COVID? That was like a complete shutdown, and the world changed after
Very much.
that. I when I was in my W-2, we got sent home for 2 weeks. 2 weeks turned into 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're like, we don't need the space anymore.
Yep.
How have you had to shift to still stay in the game? And what trends are you seeing right now?
That was a tough decision because most of my colleagues that were office brokers or working in the office, industrial made perfect sense. And there's a lot of synergies between users in office and industrial. So I would say a good number of my colleagues shifted in industrial, which I have a background a bit of industrial as well. And I said, you know what? I'm going to stick it through. I'm going to be the broker that's been with them through all the crappy, terrible times. And for the most part, that started to pay off. Now, as the market is starting to come back, we're starting to see things there. I'm not the one that abandoned them. I'm the one that stuck it through with doing the free work, doing the things that needed to get done, helping them get through. And I'll say that I think that loyalty has kind of come back and helped. I will say the one thing I think has been fortunate is that I'm in San Antonio, and San Antonio's our highs are never that high and our lows are never that low. And we're kind of blessed in the fact that, the military is such a huge aspect of our economy. Tourism, especially in-state tourism for Texas. San Antonio is the biggest location for in-state tourism. So when you want a long weekend, you come to the Riverwalk, you come to Six Flags in San Antonio. So tourism is such a huge number for us. And then when it comes to things like cybersecurity, these are jobs that either require you to come to the office or you have to be in the office, or they're industries that just don't change that often. So our demand in office, while it dipped, we got to almost 20% vacancy. Our normal is run around 10%, and we've been sitting right back at norm for the last 2 or 3 years. So we've been blessed that kind of in the right market, in the right place, whereas our neighbors to the north in Austin, it's a very different market, and just up the it's just up the road.
Yeah, that's very interesting to hear that Austin, because I was, thinking, oh, you're not too far from Austin, but to hear that it really hasn't, didn't fare as well as you folks over in San Antonio. And as you're talking about this, I remember when they're they were then they were going through some stuff with the COVID and people coming back to the office and that kind of
Mhm.
stuff. And there were people that I was working with, I'm in California, who were like, screw that, I'm moving to Texas. And they literally went and took jobs over in Texas. I bet they ended up in places like San Antonio,
Oh yeah.
right? Because they had there was just different opportunities, there were options, and there was some stuff going on here that they didn't agree with. And so did you see during that time people moving from out of state in state, and was that getting people back in offices?
So we definitely saw people coming in. I think at the peak, it was something like 14 to 1,500 people per day were moving to Texas. And in comparison, Florida was at 11 or 1,200, but
Hmm.
Florida's also a third of the size of Texas. So we got
Yeah,
a little
yeah.
more space to put you, here in Texas. But we saw a vast majority of folks coming in, many of them California, many of them New York. And you could almost laugh because all you would see is just all of a sudden there's more California plates than were Texas plates, in some parts of town. And you definitely saw that. I don't know if every one of them came into the office, and San Antonio a little bit different because our so much of our industry was in office. But if you look at Austin, it's still tech. So you had tech jobs leaving
Hmm. Hmm.
California, coming to Austin, still some of them working for the same company, just in a different role. But yeah, they're still working remote. Or many of them were still employed in California and then moving to Texas. Or, we saw Boise did a lot of this too, right? Where you move, you zoom in, and you're completely fine to work remote. So we saw definitely a lot of that. It put more demand on everything other than office. That was one of the things that was kind of interesting and a little challenging, even though some studies showed that the bars, the happy hour bars that was typically close to the office, were still doing just as much profit, but there weren't people coming to the office, which tell me I'm okay traveling. I'm okay seeing my coworkers. I just don't want to go into the office
Still
building,
want to go
which
to the office, yeah.
to me, yeah, that's indicative of another problem. There's either cultural, there's something else that's there, and we didn't see that nearly as bad in San Antonio. But those studies still prove kind of the same thing we saw here in San Antonio.
Wow, that's very interesting. It makes me think of that third space concept,
Exactly.
right? Well, people will go hang out there, and I have seen office that is a office slash third space, kind of an incubator type environment. You ever deal with those?
We do, and matter of fact, we've looked at, okay, if we were to expand to where would we go, and something like that is it's somewhat attractive. It's very flexible. You can grow into or grow out of
Hmm.
that space very easily. The rates are relatively okay. And we've even seen some concepts now where there are brokerages that are coming in, partnering with owners to come in and run those incubation spaces. So now they're doing leasing and all that. They're seeing it as incubation period for new clients that are coming in, but also partnering with that landlord to, at least kind of fill their space. It's been a viable option. We've seen it, and WeWork was the perfect example of this until they had their demise
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
throughout all that. But we've seen several smaller concepts that have kind of picked up and done extremely well. And I think WeWork likely was just wrong place, wrong time, wrong capital stack when everything kind of bottomed out on them. Where similar concepts, Regis has been just fine. They just weren't nearly as popular as or maybe as polarizing of a brand.
What trends are you seeing today that you're paying attention to in this space?
So I'm going to get really nerdy, but the one thing that I'm really diving into is this idea of the correlation between occupancy of office and the labor leverage ratio. And labor leverage ratio effectively measures whether it's an employee or an employer market. So think of it like housing, buyer or seller
Interesting.
market.
Yeah.
You kind of have this same leverage ratio on who has the upper hand. And at least post COVID, what we saw through COVID was that as occupancy of office went down, we also saw that employees had the upper hand. Now we are
Okay.
back, at least nationally, we are back now to where employers have a slightly more of the upper hand, but we're seeing occupancy in office actually come back. Now, if you look at that going pre COVID, that doesn't necessarily ring true. And some of the research that's out there right now is trying to correlate, okay, we didn't see the demand in office or the drop of demand of office. Did we see this demand go in other places like third party call centers, offshoring, that kind of stuff? And there seems to be some correlation there that as the employees get more demand, we see, basically when employers are trying to get it back, they're outsourcing, they're bringing people back in, they're doing something a little bit different. And the studies aren't complete. They're still kind of in process. There's definitely some correlation. The causation isn't necessarily there. And it's proving, depending on the industry as well. Some industries, if you look at more tech oriented, there's still the employees have the upper hand. Office occupancy is lower in those markets than in other markets where you have to be in the office or you have employers with the upper hand.
Yeah, that's I've never heard of that before. What is that? What is that term called?
It's called the labor leverage ratio.
Labor
And
leverage ratio.
and
Yeah.
basically they are comparing the number of layoffs compared to the number of quitting. So how many people quit a job versus how many people lay it off? And the idea is that if they're laid off, this is an employer. If it's quitting, then
Mm-hmm.
it's a employee. So whichever one is higher kind of gives us an idea of which side of the market is at.
Do you layer that in with the jobs report?
You can, right? You can start looking at what's going on with jobs or where you expect jobs to grow. And I think you'd have to even look at that at just total population growth inside of a
Mm-hmm.
market.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Even if the employers got more say, if the employee growth or if the population growth is dropping, you're not going to have nearly the same occupancy. So I think there's a lot of things that you have to look at and control for. But at least from a correlation standpoint, there looks to be some type of correlation between the two. And then I think each market would need some further study on what is normal, what would that look like, and then of course, assuming that market is growing and not retracting.
Gotcha. Okay. I want to shift a little bit over into the leadership space, right?
Yeah.
As much as it may not sound like it's correlated into real estate, I think there's a big connection there. Now, you've been in the space for a while and been successful. What does your leadership role look like in this space?
I think that's been fun and challenging because I think in each position it becomes very different. And I think that's one of the things that maybe I've done well or not done well at is adapting to where I'm at. So prior military joke, Sergeant Curtis, the bulldog coming out, he's there. He comes out from time to time where you need that up front. Let's go get the job done. Let's go lead from the front style leadership. And he comes out often. I've seen that in boardroom settings. I've seen him come out quite often. But what's funny is naturally I'm much more of an introvert. I'm much more of the analytical, the idea of diving into labor leverage ratios. That excites me. That's the stuff that I get super excited about and can't wait to go and read another report on a Friday night versus, go out on and do something more fun. You see that coming through, and where I think that comes a little different is that becomes more of a thought leader, more of a subject matter expert, to where now I'm guiding and consulting those conversations very differently. Honestly, I feel much more natural in that consultative space. So even my brokerage business, I become much more that consultative in the property operations space and property management, much more consultative. But when I find myself in a small team, Sergeant Curtis comes back out a lot of times where I'm kind of leading from the front and maybe backed by a little more of that analytical side of things. But I think it's really adapting to what that situation needs. And even if there's a stronger personality or somebody who's a better leader, stepping back and realizing that my job isn't to be in the front, it's to step in and lead from supporting them.
That idea, what you just mentioned right there, when did you really learn that? Is that actually something you learned in the military? Or is that something you learned along the way?
I don't know. To me, that's always felt normal. And even as a kid, I mean, I was a captain of the safety patrols. Like stepping into leadership was always something I did. Maybe I just raised my hand too much. I don't know. It was always something I did, and always found myself in those positions. But I also realized very team oriented was that maybe it is coming from the Army's time. Is that for the mission to be successful, you may not be the one in charge, and that's okay. You're bringing your expertise, you're bringing that strengths in. I will say, I think I realized that I did it more so probably in the last 4 or 5 years, and I spent some time trying to figure out what I wanted to be when I grow up.
Mm-hmm.
So about the last 3 or 4 years, really kind of dove into what do I want to do, what kind of legacy do I want to build, and where do I want to go, kind of long term. And it is really self reflective, understanding what my strengths and my weaknesses really were. And I think I became much more aware of that's who I am. And that's who I've always naturally kind of found myself moving into that position. So I don't know if I could pin it on this one or different thing, but I definitely became more aware of it in the last couple of years.
Um, I love that you're saying in the last couple of years and when you want to grow up, because I'm not saying you're old, but you're not 25, right?
Sure,
That's fair.
sure.
Okay. But I think it says a lot for someone to, even as they're have some experience to be able to reflect back on that. Are there any like big mistakes you feel like you've ever made as a leader?
Oh God, yes. every time. I mean, I think every time you turn around, I can think, probably the one that stands out the most. I was chairman of our local board of realtors. Came in, my board had some personalities on it, definitely different ways of thinking. And, I was being a little more of Sergeant Curtis in that. I was from the front, I was in the spotlight. So I was being a little bit more of him in that role. But I kind of missed the ball of building my team. I didn't really build the community. I didn't build culture with that core executive team. And we saw as the year went through, that blew up in my face. It absolutely did. And some of it was personality, some of it was things that were going to happen. And regardless of how well we built the team, I think those personalities would have come through, but I didn't do the team building nearly as well. And I think that's one of the things. Now I'm in a new venture where I'm trying to build out my brokerage and my property management arm and all that, being very, very astute to making sure who I bring in are absolute great culture fits. And while there was a mistake there, I think the biggest mistake would be not learning from that mistake, is not realizing that I screwed up there. I can't make that same mistake again. Don't let it paralyze me from not moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
Be willing to make the mistake or make new mistakes by all means. But I think the biggest mistake would have been not learning from that. And then we coached the next chair after me. I was like, hey man, here's what I screwed up. Here's what I should have done a whole lot better. And he's like, yeah, you're right. You didn't do that well. I'm going to do this and this and this better. And his year was 1,000 times better than what my year was, because he was able to see my mistakes, recognize my mistakes. And then from there, I stepped back and then allowed him to run with it, and then gave him the support he needed to go out there and make the things happen he needed to make happen.
That is awesome. That to me, that is like the definition of great leadership is recognizing that you made a mistake, owning it, and then supporting someone else through that. Because I think it's really easy as a leader to I remember early on thinking I had to be smarter than everybody else. I had to be better than everybody else. I always had to have the right answer. And I, like you, made several mistakes, but I had to learn to think differently. But I love what you just said about actually the next person, coaching them through that and making
Yeah.
them better.
I
So,
think it comes down to humility, right? I mean, that's and I think it's interesting, whether it's religion or serendipitous. I grew up in a somewhat religious household, and to me, the verse Isaiah 6:5 has always stood out to me. It says, "Woe is me, for I'm ruined, a man of unclean lips, and live amongst men of unclean lips. Yet my eyes have seen the Lord." And the story going into that was Isaiah, prior to him becoming the prophet that he was, prior to becoming all that. I promise we're not going to get preachy. But prior to doing all that, he had this moment where he walked in the temple, realized he saw God, saw the angels, saw that, and like, oh my God, I'm not, I'm nothing. And then as the story kind of goes on, that's when God calls him to go on and be, the great prophet that he was, the who should I send me God, that portion of it. And that's always stuck with me as just a powerful verse, and always kind of been there. And I've seen every time I've gone into leadership, if I walk in prideful, I'm gonna struggle. And the moment that I get knocked down, the moment I have that humbling experience, my leadership changes every single time. And it's been over and over, whether it's the military, one of the situations where right before I was getting ready to promote, trying to grow in to become an NCO and all that kind of stuff. I went to the board, I killed the board, I did some great things and all that. And all of a sudden my NCO goes, "You're not ready yet." And I was mad. I mean, I was a little more piss and vinegar back then, absolutely upset. I was like, you know what? I'm going to go. You said I'm not technically special enough. I'm going to go out there and I'm going to fix the helicopter that nobody else could say they could fix. Sure enough, I went out there, I worked on it, and fluke happened. They had to jump like 4 aircraft and take the aircraft that I had. So we didn't get to put it back together as textbook as we should. Pilots blessed it. And I went to lunch after that. I come back from lunch only to find out the helicopter crashed. And, absolutely. I mean, talk about, oh my God, I just killed 2 pilots. And from there, maybe luckily for me, it got shot down. It wasn't anything I did wrong. It wasn't anything like that, but it was such a, oh my God, my hubris of they wouldn't let me go to the promotion board, allow me to do, not stupid, but I pushed myself in a situation that was way beyond me. It was the engineers that really needed to come in and fix this strange thing. But from there, my leadership changed drastically as a leader in the Army. And then, going on into, the year as chair of SABOR, I had all these great plans, and then the industry changing lawsuits happened right beforehand. So every plan I had went out the window, and it was humbling again. And I've noticed every time I step into leadership positions and I do well, it's because I've been humbled right before the drill trial started.
That is I could feel that story when you're telling it to me. It's like a visceral moment right there. So you probably, one of the things you've learned is to listen along the way. So for someone who maybe isn't as far in their career as you, what's one thing, if you could tell your younger self something and they would listen, what's the one thing you would share with them right now?
I think it's going back to that humility. Understand that you don't have to be the greatest thing out there. That being the greatest doesn't mean you're the greatest leader. And I think, George W. Bush said several times, dude was goofy. I don't care where you sit on the political side. That dude was goofy. He had some things to him. He was not the brightest guy in the room. He was not the best leader in the room, but he said many times, he goes, I brought in the right people. I brought in people that were smarter than me, that could do this, that could make good, wise decisions. And I had to trust those people that we brought in. And I think that's what makes leadership better. And I wish those were things I would have learned early on, was that rather than trying to be the top guy, the best PT score, the best, whatever scores, realize there's people that are better than me. And that just means we're part of the team. And we're all going to win if we're working together and letting everybody be in the right seat on the bus.
Thanks so much for joining us today. If somebody wants to get a hold of you and connect with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, I think social media is probably the easiest way. I'm Will Curtis, CCIM, on just about everything you can find out there. That's the easiest place to find me. And then if you're looking for the veterans transition in real estate and that side of it, we have a podcast and a show, Vets in RE, or Vets in Real Estate, but the handle on everything in social media is Vets in RE.
Awesome. Will, thanks so much for joining today. I really appreciate you joining the show.
Appreciate it. I enjoyed it.
Absolutely. And then for those of you listening, we'll catch you on the next show. Thanks.
You've been listening to When Real Estate Gets Real with Stephen Lee Thomas. If this episode resonated, hit that subscribe button and share it with another operator navigating the realities of the business. And if you've crossed your first deal and have lessons worth sharing, you can apply to be considered as a guest in the links below. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next episode.